The air was still, almost suffocating, until a cry split the silence like glass shattering. Emily said, "That sound cannot be real." She pressed her trembling hands to her chest, her heart racing as if to escape. The nurse stepped from the dim corridor, her white shoes echoing against the cold linoleum, whispering, "It is his child." Daniel stumbled backward, his voice cracking. "No, this is a mistake." His denial tasted like ash in the room where truth had no mercy. A judge's gavel had struck just hours earlier, binding him to a secret that had been hidden for years. Emily's lips parted, not for words, but for the gasp that clawed its way out of her throat. The baby's wail filled the sterile air, a sound too sharp, too alive, a sound that crushed illusions with every note. Daniel said, "I never knew." But his words collapsed under the weight of lies unspoken. Emily's knees weakened, her world bending into fragments she could not piece together. She turned, desperate to outrun the revelation, yet the sound followed her, haunting, merciless, true. In that moment, everything fractured. Love, trust, the very ground beneath their feet. And in the shadow of that cry, nothing would ever be the same again. Emily whispered, "Daniel, this cannot be happening," her voice cracking as though she was unraveling thread by thread. Daniel said, "I never knew she existed." His words fell like stones in a hollow well, heavy and unconvincing. The baby's cries echoed through the sterile air, unrelenting, accusing. Emily's breath caught in her throat, choking on the truth she had not been prepared for. "You lied," she said, her tone brittle, half accusation, half plea. Daniel shook his head, his hands trembling, but denial looked like guilt on his face. The nurse's silence weighed heavier than words, her stillness carrying a judgment sharper than any sentence. Emily said, "Our vows mean nothing now," gripping the edge of the wall to steady herself. Daniel's lips parted, his voice breaking. "Emily, believe me." But the sound of the baby's cry drowned him out, louder, sharper, undeniable. In that instant, the walls themselves felt as though they were closing in, pressing the truth tighter against them. Emily pressed her forehead to the cold wall, whispering, "Why here? Why now?" Daniel staggered closer, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor. He said, "Emily, I swear I never knew." His voice shook like glass under strain. Emily turned her head just enough to meet his eyes, her expression carved from disbelief. "A child doesn't appear from nowhere," she replied. The baby's cry wove into her words, relentless, filling the space between them with proof stronger than denial. Daniel stretched his hand, his fingers trembling, but she stepped back, refusing his touch. The nurse shifted her weight, but kept silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, as though she too knew silence condemned. Emily said, "This moment will never leave us." Daniel's lips trembled, but no words followed. Only a broken exhale. Thin as smoke, Daniel's legs felt unsteady, as if each step pulled him deeper into quicksand. Emily said, "You shattered everything." Her voice trembled but burned with quiet rage. He whispered, "I was blind, not deceitful." Yet his trembling hands betrayed his words. Emily closed her eyes, whispering to herself, the wedding meant nothing. The image of vows shattered in her mind, confetti turning to ash. The baby's cry sharpened, as though mocking their unraveling union. Daniel dropped his gaze, his lips dry and cracked. "I wanted only us," he said, his voice hollow, but hope clung weakly to his tone. Emily shook her head, saying, "Now there's 3, and I don't even know if I can breathe." Silence followed, thick and suffocating, broken only by the baby's restless cries. Emily turned sharply, her heels clicking against the floor like strikes of a hammer. Daniel followed, pleading, "Don't walk away." She stopped only to throw a glance over her shoulder, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "You brought me here blind," she said, her words cutting sharper than steel. The nurse shifted the baby gently, its cries softening but still echoing in the tense silence. Daniel lifted his hand as if reaching for a lifeline, but Emily's stance made clear there was no bridge left to cross. "You knew something," Emily accused, her voice shaking yet steady enough to wound. Daniel shook his head, whispering, No, I swear. But even he did not seem convinced by his own denial. Emily pressed her lips tight, holding back words that threatened to destroy him further. Instead, she turned away, leaving him drowning in silence. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror, as though it belonged to someone else. She whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." Her voice trembled like glass close to breaking. Daniel stood at the doorway, shoulders sagging, his tie loosened, his eyes haunted. He said, "I want to explain." Emily turned her head sharply, pain flashing across her face. "Explain what? That a child appeared like a ghost in our lives?" The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan. Daniel's breath faltered. "I never wanted to hurt you." She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "But you did. You tore through me with secrets I never deserved." Daniel stepped forward, but she pulled back, her arms wrapping around herself, a shield against him. "I don't trust anything anymore," she said. His lips parted, but no words escaped. In that stillness, Emily felt both exposed and caged, her emotions raw, her heart unmoored. Emily pressed her palms to her face, whispering through her fingers. "I feel hollow." Daniel said, "You're stronger than you think." His words sounded weak, like rehearsed lines in a failing play. She looked at him, eyes dark, rimmed with sleeplessness. "Strength isn't surviving betrayal," she said. "It's being spared from it." Daniel exhaled sharply, guilt crawling across his features. He murmured, "I didn't know." Emily's fists clenched. "And yet I'm the one who bleeds for it." The baby's faint cry from the other room drifted in like a cruel reminder. Emily said, "Even when I close my eyes, I hear it." Daniel stepped closer, his hand outstretched, but she recoiled as though his touch would burn her. Her voice cracked. "Don't comfort me with lies, Daniel." Silence wrapped the room, leaving only the ache between them, heavy and unrelenting. Emily sat by the window, her knees pulled to her chest, gazing at the early morning rain streaking the glass. She whispered, "Every drop feels like what's inside me." Daniel stood a few feet away, restless, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He said, "I want to fix this." Emily turned her head slowly, eyes sharp as blades. "You can't fix what was shattered before I even knew it was broken." His breath faltered. "I never asked for this either." She laughed bitterly, pressing her forehead against her knees. "Then why does it feel like punishment carved only for me?" He looked at her, helpless, his words swallowed by guilt. "I can't lose you," he said softly. Emily whispered, "You already have." Her voice was low but final, like a stone dropped into deep water, leaving ripples that would never fade. The baby's cry pierced the air again, raw and unrelenting. Emily rose reluctantly, her body heavy with exhaustion. She said, "Every sound reminds me of the life I never chose." Daniel followed her into the nursery, his steps hesitant. He said, "It's not the child's fault." Emily froze, staring at the crib. "No," she whispered. "It's yours." Her words were sharp enough to wound. Daniel's face collapsed, shame written across every feature. The baby squirmed in the crib, fists waving, tiny face red with need. Emily leaned over, hands trembling, her heart torn between resentment and a strange, aching tenderness. She whispered, "What am I supposed to be to you?" Her question was not to Daniel but to the child. Daniel said quietly, "You're everything." Emily's tears fell silently as the baby's cries filled the room, binding her fate to a truth she could neither deny nor escape. Emily sat in the rocking chair, the baby in her arms, its small weight both anchor and chain. She whispered, "You didn't ask for this, and neither did I." Daniel crouched in front of her, his eyes searching hers desperately. "Emily, please," he said, "don't shut me out." She stroked the baby's soft cheek, tears dripping silently. "You lied to me without even speaking," she murmured. Daniel shook his head, his voice breaking. "I never knew." Emily's gaze cut through him, sharp and unyielding. "But the truth doesn't care about your ignorance," she said. The baby sighed in her arms, innocence radiating from its fragile form. Emily whispered, "I don't know if I can love through this pain." Daniel's hands clenched into fists, his body shaking with helplessness. The room filled with silence, heavy and unbroken, leaving them all trapped in its suffocating grip. The house grew colder with every silence, the walls carrying whispers too sharp to ignore. Emily said, "Your family will never accept me now." Daniel rubbed his temples, his face gray with exhaustion, replying, "Thou understand in time." She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "They already think I'm weak, and now they'll see me as a fool." He reached for her, but she pulled back, her arms folding like armor. The baby's cry from the next room was sharp, a reminder of the bond that chained them and divided them. Emily whispered, "Even my own parents have stopped answering my calls." Daniel dropped his gaze, shame dripping from every breath. "I'll stand beside you," he said, but the conviction in his voice sounded thin. Emily shook her head slowly. "You can't shield me from the world's judgment, Daniel. They've already chosen their side." The air felt suffocating, as if every corner of the room pressed in tighter with blame. Emily sat at the kitchen table, untouched food before her. She muttered, "Even the neighbors look at me differently." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his jaw set. "People gossip because they're small," he said. Emily's eyes narrowed, glistening. "But gossip breaks more than words. It breaks people." She slammed her hand on the table, startling even herself. Daniel winced, but stayed silent. "Do you hear what they whisper?" she asked, her voice cracking. "They call me unfit, a mistake, a burden," Daniel whispered. "They don't know you." Emily shot him a look sharp enough to cut. "Then why do their words sound truer than yours?" The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Daniel stared at her, his expression torn between anger and helplessness, while Emily felt the world shrink smaller with every passing second. The baby's cry carried through the thin walls, relentless as a heartbeat. Emily paced the nursery, whispering, "What if they take you from me?" Daniel entered quietly, his voice low. "No one will take our child." Emily spun to face him, her eyes blazing. "Don't call her ours when the truth came with lies." Daniel staggered back slightly, the words hitting like blows. He said, "I only want to make this right." She hugged the baby to her chest, rocking, her voice trembling. "Every time I look at her, I see the weight of betrayal." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, helpless to bridge the gulf between them. The baby quieted slightly, sighing against Emily's shoulder, but the silence that followed felt sharper than the cries. Emily said, "I'm losing myself in this storm, and you are already gone." Emily stood outside on the porch, night air heavy with mist. She whispered to herself, "They don't see me as a mother, only as a mistake." Daniel stepped beside her, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You don't need their approval," he said softly. She turned, her eyes cold. "But I needed your honesty." The street was quiet, but Emily could almost hear the echoes of gossip from unseen mouths. "They'll never forgive me," she said, her voice brittle. Daniel whispered, "Then let them choke on their judgment." Emily shook her head slowly. "It's not their judgment that haunts me. It's mine." She hugged herself tightly, her breath visible in the damp night air. Daniel's hand twitched, wanting to reach for her, but he stopped, leaving the gulf between them unbroken. Inside the living room, voices rose in heated clash. Emily shouted, "You let me drown in lies, Daniel." He shouted back, "I didn't know, I swear." The baby began crying in the background, but their voices surged louder. Emily's face was streaked with tears, her voice raw. "Everything I built around us was glass, and you shattered it." Daniel's fists slammed the table, rattling the room. "I'm fighting for us, Emily." She stepped back, her voice lowering but cutting deeper. "You're only fighting to save yourself." The baby's cries grew louder, echoing the chaos. Emily pressed her palms to her ears for a moment, then whispered, "I don't know if I can do this anymore." The room fell silent, but the sound of breaking lingered inside them both. The evening felt too still, as though the walls braced themselves for impact. Emily sat rigid on the sofa, her hands knotted tightly in her lap. She whispered, "There's something no one told me." Daniel frowned, his face tightening, and said, "What do you mean?" Emily turned toward him, eyes wide and glassy. "Your sister called me today." Daniel's body stiffened instantly, his voice low and defensive. "What did she say?" Emily's lips quivered, her voice breaking. "She said the baby isn't who I thought she was." Daniel's breath caught, his skin draining of color. He stammered, "She shouldn't have said that." Emily's voice rose, sharp with betrayal. "So it's true? There's more to this than you told me?" Daniel pressed his fists against his knees, silence confirming what words could not. The quiet between them throbbed like a wound that would not close. Emily's chest heaved as though every breath scraped her raw. "She told me the baby is not yours," she whispered, the words trembling in the air. Daniel closed his eyes, shaking his head slowly. "It isn't like that," he muttered, but his voice broke. Emily leaned forward, her tears falling freely. "Then, what is it, Daniel? What truth have you buried?" He opened his mouth, but the words tangled, strangled by fear. "It's my brother," he said finally, the confession cutting through the silence like a blade. Emily's gasp tore from her throat, her hand flying to her mouth. "Your brother?" she repeated, disbelief scorching every syllable. Daniel buried his face in his hands. "I was trying to protect you from this." Emily's voice quivered with rage. "You were protecting yourself." The room trembled under the weight of the revelation. Emily staggered to her feet, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. "You let me believe all this time that she was yours," she said, her words shaking. Daniel rose slowly, reaching out. "I didn't know how to tell you." She backed away, each step heavy with betrayal. "You looked me in the eye and swore you were innocent." His voice cracked. "I never lied about not knowing until the test." Emily shook her head violently, tears dripping onto the floor. "You lied by silence, Daniel." He pressed a hand against his chest, gasping as though the truth itself crushed him. "I thought I was saving us," he whispered. Emily's laugh broke into a sob, bitter and hollow. "You've only destroyed us." The air thickened with grief, their words clashing like broken glass in the dark. The baby's soft cry drifted through the hallway, a fragile sound that sliced into the storm. Emily whispered, "What does this make me? What am I in this story?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he said, "You are still her mother." Emily glared at him, fury burning behind the sorrow. "A mother by accident, while you and your family weave lies." Daniel stepped closer, voice cracking. "It doesn't change what she means to us." Emily shook her head, clutching the edge of the sofa for balance. "It changes everything. Every moment, every vow, every word between us." Daniel reached a hand out, trembling. "Emily, please." She turned sharply, her voice like thunder. "Don't say my name as though it can save me." The baby's cry grew louder, echoing the fracture of their lives. Emily's voice fell into a whisper, trembling yet sharp. "So the secret you buried was not about me, but about him." Daniel nodded, his shoulders collapsing. "My brother made a mistake, and I tried to shield us." Emily shook her head slowly, her voice shaking. "You didn't shield us, you damned us." Daniel dropped to his knees, his face contorted with desperation. "Please, don't walk away from me." Emily's tears fell freely, her heart torn but her resolve burning. "This child will never stop being a reminder of the lies." Daniel whispered hoarsely, "But she's innocent." Emily stared at him, her chest heaving, her voice breaking. "So was I, until you destroyed me with silence." The baby's cry lingered like a final verdict, sealing the truth none of them could escape. The courthouse air was thick with tension, every cough and shuffle magnified in the silence. Emily sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, her knuckles white as she clutched the edge. She whispered, "This is where everything ends or begins." Daniel sat across from her, his posture stiff, his eyes flickering between her and the child's guardian. He said, We can't let them decide our fate. Emily turned slowly, her gaze like fire. We didn't let truth decide, Daniel. You chose lies. The judge lifted papers, his gavel waiting. Emily's heart pounded like war drums, her chest aching with fury and grief. Daniel leaned forward, his voice breaking. I never meant for it to come here, Emily said, but here we are. The baby's cry pierced the courtroom, silencing whispers, dragging all eyes toward innocence caught in the storm. Emily rose to her feet, her voice sharp, breaking through the silence. I am not the liar here, she said, her tears burning trails down her cheeks. Daniel stood too, his voice cracking. I tried to protect you. She turned, fury shaking her words. You protected yourself, Daniel, while you let me burn. The courtroom murmured, whispers swelling like waves against her strength. Daniel slammed his fist against the table, his face twisted. I won't let you take her from me. Emily glared, her body trembling, but her voice steady. She was never yours to claim. The baby whimpered softly, the sound heavier than the gavel's strike. The judge cleared his throat, but no command could silence the storm between them. Emily felt her resolve harden, her truth echoing louder than fear. Emily's voice trembled, but her words struck like steel. I carried his silence like a chain, and I will not carry his lies. Daniel's eyes widened, his breath shallow. You can't erase me. Emily stepped forward, the baby's soft whimpers echoing in the courtroom. You erased yourself, Daniel, the moment you chose silence over truth. The gallery gasped, the tension mounting. Daniel's face crumbled, shame and anger tearing through him. I loved you, he said, his voice breaking. I still do. Emily's tears flowed freely as she answered. Love without truth is nothing but poison. The room fell silent, the judge's gavel hovering but unstruck, as though even justice paused to absorb the storm unleashed. The baby began crying louder, the sound raw and haunting. Emily closed her eyes, rocking slightly where she stood. She whispered, her innocence is the only truth left. Daniel reached toward her, his hand trembling. Emily, please, he begged. She turned to him, her eyes sharp as broken glass. You don't get to beg when you've broken everything. His hand froze midair, trembling, before falling helplessly to his side. The judge's voice called for order, but the room's silence was heavier than thunder. Emily looked at the baby, her voice cracking. She deserves more than secrets. She deserves a mother who will not hide the truth. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, his body shaking with sobs, his strength shattered in front of the world. Emily stood in the center of the courtroom, her body trembling, but her voice rang with finality. This is where I decide. I will not let this child grow in shadows. Daniel raised his head, his eyes red, broken. Don't take her away from me, he pleaded. Emily's gaze softened briefly, but her resolve cut sharper than pity. I will raise her in truth, even if it costs me everything. Daniel's lips quivered, his tears falling unchecked. I can't survive without you, he whispered. Emily shook her head slowly, her voice barely audible, yet unshakable. You already lost me. The baby's soft coo replaced her cries, a fragile silence filling the room like a verdict written in light. The judge's gavel finally struck, sealing fate with a sound that echoed through their bones. The gavel's echo lingered long after silence returned, as though the sound itself had carved scars into the walls. Emily carried the baby out of the courtroom, her arms tight around the small bundle. She whispered, "It's just us now." Daniel followed a few steps behind, his face hollow, his eyes red from tears. "Emily," he said softly, "please don't leave me like this." She turned briefly, her voice fragile but sharp. "I didn't leave you. You left us when you chose silence." His shoulders collapsed, his body trembling with defeat. Emily pressed her cheek against the baby's head, her heart aching with both love and sorrow. "She deserves peace," she said quietly. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came, only the weight of regret filling the space between them. Emily sat in her small living room, the baby asleep in her arms, the the soft sound of her breathing filling the quiet. She whispered, "You are my beginning, not my end." Daniel stood by the doorway, hesitant, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to live without you." Emily shook her head, her gaze fixed on the child. "You'll have to learn, Daniel. Some wounds don't heal just because you want them to." His breath faltered, his body leaning against the doorframe as though he carried the weight of the world. Emily's eyes softened briefly, but her resolve held. "I'll forgive myself before I ever forgive you." Daniel's eyes glistened, his hands twitching as if to reach out but frozen in fear. The room breathed heavy with finality, fragile yet unshakable. Emily walked through the quiet park, autumn leaves crunching beneath her feet. She pushed the stroller slowly, her eyes watching the baby's small movements. She whispered, "You're the truth I'll carry no matter the cost." Daniel followed at a distance, his coat pulled tight, his face pale in the fading light. "I just wanted to see her," he said softly, his voice carried by the wind. Emily turned slightly, her expression unreadable. "She's not yours to see, not anymore." His shoulders sagged, his eyes wet, his steps faltering. Emily bent to adjust the blanket around the baby, her lips trembling. "She will know love, not lies." Daniel covered his face with his hands, his sobs muffled by the chill. Emily's tears fell silently, but her resolve stood firm, like stone against the storm. Inside the nursery, Emily rocked gently in the chair, the baby nestled against her chest. She whispered, "They tried to break me, but you held me together." Daniel's voice drifted softly from the doorway. "I still love you." Emily's head lowered, her tears slipping silently onto the baby's blanket. "Love without truth is a wound, Daniel, and I can't keep bleeding." His hand rested on the doorframe, knuckles white, his lips trembling. "I don't know how to let go," he said. Emily closed her eyes, her rocking slow and steady. "You already lost me. What's left is only memory." Daniel's face twisted, his body collapsing into the frame as though the words gutted him. The baby sighed softly, innocence cradled in arms stronger than grief. Emily stood by the window, dawn's first light spilling across her face. The baby stirred softly in her arms, stretching tiny fingers toward the rising sun. She whispered, "This is the beginning of us, not the end." Daniel watched from the street below, his figure blurred by the glass, his eyes locked on the silhouette of what he had lost. Emily pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, her tears catching the morning light like fragments of glass. "You'll never be a secret," she said softly. The world outside stirred awake, but inside the room, time felt suspended. Daniel turned away, shoulders hunched, his steps heavy as though everyone carried a lifetime of regret. Emily closed her eyes, holding the child close, the light wrapping them in fragile promise. The night was still, the world hushed, as Emily sat in the rocking chair, the baby sleeping against her chest. She whispered, "I thought love would protect me, but truth is the only shield I have." Daniel stood in the doorway, his shadow stretched long across the nursery floor. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly, his voice breaking under its own weight. Emily shook her head, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You loved yourself more than us, Daniel." He pressed a hand against the doorframe, his shoulders trembling. "I wanted to be better," he murmured. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Wanting isn't enough. She deserves more than apologies." Daniel's breath caught, his lips quivering, but words failed him. Emily kissed the baby's forehead softly, whispering, "I will never let her believe love is a lie." Emily walked into the church alone, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence. She sat in the last pew, the baby cradled close, her voice a whisper. "God, give me strength to love her without fear." The faint flicker of candlelight reflected in her eyes, shimmering like fragile hope. Daniel entered quietly, his figure silhouetted against the stained glass. "I came because I don't know where else to go," he said softly. Emily kept her eyes on the altar. "Then sit in silence, Daniel. Let silence teach you what words never could." He lowered his head, tears dripping onto the polished wood. Emily closed her eyes, holding the baby tighter. "Forgive me," Daniel whispered into the stillness. but his plea dissolved into echoes. The church carried both their grief like a hymn of unfinished prayers. Rain fell heavy outside, streaking the windows as Emily stood by the glass, watching the world blur. She whispered, "Every storm ends, but it leaves the ground scarred." The baby stirred in her arms, stretching small fingers toward the dim light. Daniel's reflection appeared faintly beside hers, though he stood outside in the rain. He shouted through the glass, his voice muffled, "I can't walk away." Emily's eyes burned as she whispered back, knowing he couldn't hear. "You already did." His fist struck the window once, desperation breaking him. She kissed the baby's tiny hand, her tears falling into the blanket. "I'll keep her safe from the storms," she promised. Daniel pressed his forehead against the glass, his sobs hidden by the rain's relentless rhythm. The house was quiet. The storm passed, leaving only broken branches scattered outside. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the baby who cooed softly in her lap. She whispered, "You're my truth, my reason, my wound, and my healing." Daniel entered slowly, his steps dragging, his face hollow. "I don't want to disappear from her life," he said, his voice fragile. Emily looked at him, her expression carved from both sorrow and steel. "You will always be her shadow, Daniel, but I can't let you be her storm." His lips parted, but he swallowed his words, defeated. Emily stroked the baby's cheek gently, her tears falling silently. "She will know who I am," she whispered, her voice breaking but firm. Daniel bowed his head, unable to lift his eyes, the silence sealing his fate. Dawn broke across the horizon, painting the sky in fragile shades of pink and gold. Emily stood on the porch, the baby resting against her shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "I held her once, and that was enough to make me fight forever." Daniel lingered at the edge of the yard, his figure shadowed against the rising light. "Will she ever know me?" he asked, his voice torn apart. Emily turned her head, her eyes glistening but unyielding. "She'll know who I am, Daniel. That's all that matters." The wind carried his sobs away, leaving silence in their place. Emily pressed her lips to the baby's soft hair, whispering, "We begin here." The final light touched their faces, fragile but eternal, a closing note that lingered like a wound refusing to heal.